The entry was tucked between two older scrolls, brittle with salt and age. I almost missed it. But Eirik's runes are unmistakable, cut with purpose, lean and deliberate, like the man himself. What struck me immediately was how little context he gave. No date, no names, just a location and a warning.
Burn this before you finish reading. If you cannot burn it, bury it beneath ash, not stone.
That's how it begins. Eirik writes of a raid, a small coastal village, forgettable in every way. Mud huts, fish nets, bad ale. They expected easy plunder, but there were no screams when they arrived, no defenders, just empty homes and a strange silence, the kind that clings to your lungs when snow is coming. Only the hills stood out. It rose behind the village like a swollen knot in the land, half covered in moss and wrapped by 6 standing stones. Tall, narrow, and weather-worn. No runes on their faces, only spirals carved in shallow relief, each one drawing the eye inward. Eirik noted the villagers had built around the hill, not toward it. No footpaths, no altars, as if it wasn't sacred, but forbidden. Yet the soil around the mound had been disturbed, freshly packed, uneven in places. Signs of digging. Eirik trusted his gut more than omens, but he was no fool. He'd learned long ago that true danger doesn't announce itself with screams. It waits in silence. He posted guards and held off pillaging. That night, while the men drank and laughed, he climbed the hill alone. He doesn't describe the slab in detail, just that it was embedded in the earth like a bone under skin. Cold, seamless, neither stone nor metal, something else. A dull throb that made the soles of his feet ache, as if the ground was holding its breath beneath him. He didn't touch it, didn't speak, just listened. The wind stopped, and he heard breathing beneath his boots. Not fast, not desperate, sleeping. Then came the impressions. Not words, not visions, something deeper. A sense of age, of long hunger, and the faintest shape of a question. It wasn't directed at him. It was waiting for a voice, for a name, for someone to give it shape again. Eirik left the hill in silence, but that night he didn't join the fire. He sat alone, watching the mound from a distance. The torchlight never touched it. When one of his men mocked his caution, Eirik didn't rise to anger. He simply asked the man if he'd like to finish what the villagers started. The man went pale, said nothing more. They left at first light. No loot, no fires, no songs. Just quiet oars pulling through morning mist. And as they sailed away, Eirik looked back once, only once, and saw that one of the stones had fallen, as if something beneath had shifted in its sleep. Eirik didn't sleep for days after they left that shore. He never says it outright, never admits weakness, but the rhythm of his entries, the things he chooses not to say, make it plain enough. He writes about the sea, the men, the windless sky, but none of it matters. His thoughts had rooted themselves back on that hill, winding tight around the image of the slab and the fallen stone. It wasn't the presence of something old that disturbed him. It was the absence of everything else. There'd been no shrine, no blood, no bones, no runes marking names or offerings. The place felt ancient. He could taste that in the air, but there was no sign it had ever been honored. The villagers hadn't worshipped what was buried there. They had feared it, built their homes away from it, dug shallow pits around it, as if trying to repair whatever damage had been done. Eirik had seen that kind of fear before. This was the same flavor of dread. Cold, generational, taught in silence, not sagas. And now it had followed them to sea. On the third night, with no wind and no moon, Eirik heard something new. A soft grinding in his jaw, not from stress or gnashing. This was deeper, a tension behind the teeth, a pressure he felt more than heard, as if someone were dragging a stone across the inside of his skull. He rose from his bedroll and climbed above deck. The sea was still. There were no waves or stars, just black glass stretching in every direction. And there, drifting on the surface, he saw it. A spiral, drawn in condensation on the water, floating like oil. When he reached out to touch it, it vanished. The pressure in his jaw eased. He gave no orders, no explanation, just told the crew to row, and they obeyed. 3 days passed before the winds returned. When they made landfall, Eirik gave his men leave to rest and spend their share, but he didn't stay. He rowed inland with nothing but his cloak, his axe, and a question he could not let rot in his mind. What had they uncovered, and who else might have known? There was one man who might. Jovar, a half-mad skald turned recluse. Jovar lived among the cairn fields in the southern ridges, surrounded by the bones of giants and mad kings. He spoke little and laughed often, but he collected things others feared to name, tales from the old bloodlines, fragments of forgotten tongues, and rumors that were meant to die in silence. Eirik reached him by dusk. He offered no greeting, just knelt in the dirt and drew the spiral with his thumb. Jovar went still. The fire behind him popped, but he didn't flinch. His voice, when it came, was thin and trembling.
Where did you see this?
Eirik gave no answer. The skald exhaled slowly and spoke a single word.
Varthekja.
Eirik didn't recognize it. The dialect was older than anything sung in halls or inscribed in stone. Jovar explained. It meant veil or covering, depending on usage. But not like a shroud over the dead, like a lid, something forced shut.
You didn't find a shrine. You found a lock. One of 6.
Eirik asked what was behind it. Jovar didn't answer. He just stepped back into his home and barred the door from within. Eirik waited 3 days outside Jovar's door. He left offerings, mead, dried meat, a Frankish pendant carved from bone. On the 3rd night, he built a fire in silence, eyes fixed on the cairns beyond the ridgeline. The flame danced, but the heat never touched him. His thoughts were elsewhere, spiraling back to the slab and the breath beneath the earth. At dawn, the door creaked open. Jovar stepped out, gaunt and sleepless. He said nothing, only placed a scroll wrapped in iron twine into Eirik's hands and returned inside, shutting the door with finality. No blessings or warnings. Eirik unraveled it on the ride north. The scroll was brittle, inked in ochre and dust, written in an older tongue than even the skald's whisper. It spoke of the Varthekja, not as a deity, but as a breach. Not something that came through the world, but something that was always here, sealed long ago by those who feared what it might become, if ever remembered. It had no need for worshippers. It fed on recollection. It grew by being seen, known, and spoken of, not adored or acknowledged. A kind of entity that thrived on thought itself. Every seal, every symbol, every spiral was not a monument, but a warning. And everyone that was unearthed made it stronger. There were 6 stones, each one an anchor for the mind, to keep thought from forming too completely around the thing beneath, to fragment the pattern, a cage of dissonance. Eirik rode without rest. He retraced their path across coast and cliff, following the currents he knew by heart. But his goal wasn't the village, it was the overlook. A high ridge above the fjord where he could see the hill again from afar, without touching it. When he arrived, the landscape had changed. The air was too still. The trees bent subtly toward the sea, not from wind, but some unseen pull. Mist clung to the ground like skin, and in the distance, he saw it, the hill, unmistakable. But now, something stood atop it. At first, he thought it was a man, then a marker. But as the fog shifted, he saw the truth. One of the 6 stones, once spaced evenly around the mound, had been moved. Now it stood directly above the slab, as if drawn there, as if pulled by memory's gravity. Eirik descended, moving slow and silent. When he reached the ruins of the village, he found them not as they'd left them. The huts were collapsed, nets frayed, wood soft with rot, as if years had passed in weeks, and the slab no longer buried. It jutted from the hill like a broken fang, half exposed, its surface now crawling with symbols that hadn't been there before. The spiral had changed, no longer open-ended, but tightening, as if turning inward, as if forming an eye. Eirik didn't approach. He didn't draw steel. He didn't kneel. He stood still, watching it for a long time, until the air grew colder around him, until he felt, not in his bones, but in his thoughts, that it was watching back. Then he turned and walked away, not in fear, but in defiance. He would not be the one to open it, but he would remember, and he would make sure no one else stumbled on it in ignorance. The seal had shifted, the memory stirred, but it had not broken, not yet. Eirik didn't speak of what he saw for months, not to his men, not to his skalds, not even to the volur who cast runes over his wounds and warned of long shadows in his blood. He buried it in silence, the way wise men bury knives, deep and handle first, so no one could pull it out by mistake. But memory doesn't rot like flesh. It sharpens. The dreams returned first, but they didn't come with screams or symbols. They came with maps, not drawn on skin or paper, but on the inside of his skull. Lines that burned when he closed his eyes. 6 hills, 6 spirals, 6 points of pressure pressing inward from every corner of the known world. And always, at the center of that web, Eirik stood alone, whispering names backward. He refused to follow them. Instead, he rode, far north, far inland, anywhere the dreams couldn't find him. But they didn't chase him across distance. They chased him through stillness, through the silence between footsteps. That's when he noticed the flame. It bent toward him. No matter where he sat or how the wind moved, firelight leaned into his presence. Shadows stretched away from him unnaturally, like limbs recoiling from heat. He tried not to watch, not to wonder, but the world had begun to shift. One morning, a raven landed at his feet and cawed a single note, a flat, grating sound like metal scraping wood. When it flew off, it left behind a feather shaped like a spiral. He burned it without hesitation. He knew what was happening. Not a curse, not a haunting, a pull. The slab wasn't chasing him. It was waiting, like a book left open to a page someone couldn't stop rereading. So Eirik did what no other warrior would do. He answered it without approaching it. He returned to the highlands, not to the hill, but to a place he trusted. Granite cliffs untouched by burial or ritual. There, in the crook of a narrow valley, he built something of his own. 6 stones, equal in height and weight to those that ringed the slab. Not inscribed with spirals, but carved with staves of confusion. Symbols meant to disorient, to scatter focus. Ancient warding runes he'd only seen once before, etched into a mad king's tongue before it was cut out and fed to fire. He placed them in a ring, not to summon, not to contain, to anchor, to drag the memory down where even the gods wouldn't look. He didn't chant, didn't pray. He just stood at the center and made a promise, not to the god beneath the stones, but to the world above them.
You will not feed on me. You will not spread through my mouth. I am not your voice. I am your wall.
That night, the dream stopped. But the spiral remained, not in sight or in sound, but in knowing. Eirik didn't fear that. He respected it, and in that respect, he found power. The final portion of the entry reads not as a recounting, but as something more deliberate. It's no longer a record of what happened. It's a measure of what must not happen again. The tone is steady, colder than before, but not hollow. There's resolve in the way Eirik speaks of what comes next, and a sharpened edge in the choices he makes. He did not return to the hill, not out of fear nor shame, but because he understood something most men never live long enough to learn. You don't always kill the thing you fear. Sometimes you bury it so deep that even forgetting becomes a form of survival. He continued to lead, continued to raid. The dreams faded, the pressure in his teeth lessened, and the strange bending of firelight eventually stopped altogether. But he never took another campaign near the western coast. He never again accepted plunder from an unmarked hill, and he never drew another spiral, not even in jest. He writes of others who have seen the signs, traitors, thralls, even a chieftain who claimed to have lost half his men to a ruin that sang in silence. Eirik listened, but he did not share what he knew. He understood now what the god below the stones truly fed on. Not worship, not sacrifice, attention. The moment you spoke of it, whispered, carved, remembered, it stirred, not as a beast, but as a concept. And the more you tried to understand it, the deeper it rooted itself in your thoughts, feeding on the shape your mind gave it. So he refused to give it shape. He refused to let it grow, but he didn't lie to himself. He knew the seal had shifted. One stone had moved. Others, somewhere in the world, might follow. Curiosity was a hunger older than gods, and someone, someday, would look where they shouldn't. That was why he wrote this. Not as a tale to be told in firelit halls, not as a warning scrawled in blood, but as a boundary, words set at the edge of thought to keep the spiral from closing. He ends with no name, no place, no closing rites. Just these lines, carved deep enough to press through the back of the page.
There are things beneath the world that were never meant to be given form. Not in worship, not in fear, just not at all. Forget the hill. Forget the shape. Forget what you've read. And if you cannot, bury it beneath ash. Never stone.
Some truths are meant to be carved in stone. Others are buried in ash. For a reason. If this story left you with a lingering chill, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale from Eirik's saga. And tell me, if you stumbled upon a slab sealed beneath 6 standing stones, would you dig it up? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching Cabin of Whispers. See you next time.